Here we are with Cecilia Kane, who is part of the Mission Accomplished show at Attica. Cecilia, can you tell me about your project?
Yes, Hand to Hand started in 2003, the first day of the Iraq War. As an artist, I use my craft to understand the world, and I've been trying to figure out why people go to war. And so that day, I'd already been working with gloves, my mother's gloves, that I had found in some purses of hers after she died. And they were holding these kidskin gloves the shape of her hands. So for me, they were like stand-ins for humanity. And when I was working with them, I decided that I would use gloves to analyze the war, and I would do it every day, thinking mission accomplished later on, that maybe this was going to be a slam dunk, as I think Rumsfeld had said. Mm-hmm. So each day I took a news headline or part of it, and I wrote it on the palm of a white cotton glove that I had stuffed. And I put the date on the fingers and a drawing of my reaction to that news event in Iraq. Mm-hmm. And I just kept going at it. And I did it for 3 years exclusively, starting at first with rough marker sketches, and as the war went on, I started doing more involved little paintings, so that by 2005, when I had a showing of them at the Atlanta Contemporary Arts Center, they were a lot of work each day. At that point, there was a closing reception, and I announced that I just could not do this anymore. I had given myself Sundays off, but I said I just can't go on, and a friend of mine who's one of the glove artists here, Judy Russian, who lives in Florida, said, "You can't stop now. The war is still going on. It's at its peak. I'll help." In fact, she said, "We'll get artists to help you." And from that moment on, a big change occurred. Other artists signed up for, like me, a 6-day week. They waited for their week to roll around because there were people signed up for 6 months in advance at one point. And they would take a news story a day and do an artwork in their own medium. I first thought that they should do it like me, but Joe Perugini, one of the artists in 2006, said, "Hey, can I do an animation?" And I said, why not? And one thing I learned from doing all this was that I could trust the artists. I didn't have to have this big control. There was this general idea about you do a news story a day using your own media. And from that vantage point, I got some really exciting and interesting work.
What do you think that broadening the individual perspectives, what do you think that's brought to the project?
Well, visually first, it's much more engaging, I think, to come into this room and see everything from puppet hands to embroidery to folk art, animation, and video. And I think everybody has some opinion about war. They didn't realize it. Many artists, several of them told me, "Thank you for forcing me to pay attention to this war." And they were ignoring it, like most Americans.
Sure.
And so by expanding it, I have had a chance to study war in a different way, to see how it affects them and how in their own lives they are affected.
So what happens? What's the next step?
Well, there is one more venue, and in Vermont, that is going to be the final. And after that show, which will be at the Chaffee Arts Center in Rutland, Vermont, it's returning to Atlanta. I'm going to put together a local closing performance ceremony with as many local Atlanta artists. There are 138 Georgian artists in this show. And after that performance and that closure, I would like to find a collecting institution that I can donate it to. Because to me, the other option is to send it individually back to all the artists. It already exists online as a museum, so to speak. But once I start sending it back, then it's not intact anymore, and I think it loses its value.
Yeah, seeing them all at once is a powerful experience. But I did want to ask you too, what is the value of the individual pieces versus not necessarily monetary value, but your conceptual value? How do the individual pieces relate to the whole?
Most people in the show did not know what other people were doing. A few had seen it before, and I would reference going to the website for people to get an idea. But they came at it through their own viewpoint, their own media. And I also said, hey, come at it from the point of view of your angle on your artwork. For example, this artist here, Meg Aubrey, she lives in Alpharetta in the suburbs, and she decided that the war is not being paid attention to in suburbia where she is, and so she took iconic objects in a suburb, the mailbox, the the signage,
Sure.
and she put her news stories in conjunction so that the clash would be obvious.